France holds unprecedented war games amid military buildup. The drill's commander, Nicolas Elienin, called the war games the return of major military operations to French territory. More than 7,000 servicemen are currently taking part in France's biggest military exercise in decades, which is dubbed Orion 23 and is scheduled to be wrapped up in May. Apart from French soldiers, servicemen from the US, the UK and Spain are involved in the drills that will simulate parachute operations and amphibious landings along the Mediterranean coast. The operations, which are currently in full swing across the Occitanie region in France, will then move to the Atlantic coast regions of Nouvelle-Aquitaine and Brittany. The drills consist of 4 stages, with the most important Phase 4 expected to see a major air-land confrontation between France and a simulated enemy. According to a French newspaper, the country's army has mobilized the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier and more than 1,000 land and sea vehicles for the unprecedented large-scale military simulation. Another French newspaper cited an unnamed military source as saying that Orion 23's goal is to show France's ability to be the first to enter a theater of operations, but also to lead an international coalition. Exercise Commander Nicolas Elienin, for his part, described the drills as the return of big operations on French soil. France to beef up its defense budget. These war games come amid France's ever-increasing effort to build up its military might and Paris' bellicose rhetoric toward Moscow, which continues its special military operation in Ukraine. In late January, French President Emmanuel Macron detailed plans for a major boost to the country's armed forces, which he said is needed to meet modern threats, naming Russia as a primary area of focus for Paris. According to Macron, the next 7-year budget would increase to €413 billion, $435 billion, up from €295 billion, $311 billion. Meeting soldiers at Mont-de-Marsan Air Base at the time, Macron said that first and foremost, France should repair and restock its armed forces, and then transform them. The French president admitted that there were no more post-Cold War peace dividends following Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, which is why he said the goal is to renew a French military that should protect the country's freedom, security, prosperity, and place in the world. France to build up military presence in Eastern Europe within NATO framework, Minister. The reforms, in particular, stipulate a 60% hike in the military intelligence budget to adapt to high-intensity conflict with investment in drones, cyber defense and improved air defenses. Macron warned that we France need to be one war ahead. He also called for France to rethink its alliances while remaining a reliable NATO ally, and deepening its relationships with Germany, the UK, Italy, and Spain. National Strategic Review. The remarks followed Macron unveiling France's National Strategic Review in November 2022, aimed at defining how the country's defense will look like in 2030. France wants to be an independent, respected, agile power at the heart of European strategic autonomy with strong links to the Atlantic Alliance, he said at the time. He again lashed out at Russia over its special operation in Ukraine, which Macron claimed may precede broader geopolitical rivalries and a future that we have no reason to accept with fatalism. According to him, France's new strategic document provides that the country will maintain a capacity to lead military operations, including those of high intensity, alone or within a coalition. Macron added that French troops would maintain their large presence abroad in an area stretching from sub-Saharan Africa to the Middle East. The French president also said that Paris would launch talks with its African partners and regional organizations to make changes to the status, format, and missions of the current French military bases in the Sahel and West Africa. A new organization, based on collaboration between French and local armed forces, is expected to be formed within 6 months of the discussions. The National Strategic Review specifically focuses on nuclear deterrence regarding France, which is the only EU country with nuclear weapons. When peace is back in Ukraine, we will need to assess all the consequences via a new security architecture in Europe, Macron said. He argued that a credible, Modern nuclear deterrence is key to building up such an architecture, adding, "Our nuclear forces contribute through their own existence to the security of France and Europe." Russia to discuss France, UK nuclear potential. France's Orion 23 drills kicked off a few days after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the suspension of his country's participation in the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START. "I have to announce today that Russia is suspending its participation in the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. Let me repeat, Russia is not withdrawing from the treaty, but merely suspending its participation. But before returning to discussing it, we need to understand what countries like France and the United Kingdom consider to be their strategic arsenals, and how we will take them into account, that is, the combined strike potential of the North Atlantic Alliance," Putin said during his address to the Federal Assembly on February 21. The issue was also mentioned in Putin's interview with Russian media on Sunday, when he said that Moscow has to return to discussing the issue of the UK and France's nuclear potential, because NATO has shown that it is a military bloc, rather than a political one. "At one time, we moved not to take them into account, bearing in mind both détente and the fact that NATO had declared itself an almost demilitarized organization. They claimed the alliance was a political organization rather than a military bloc. But we see what is happening, so we are simply forced to return to the discussion of this topic," Putin pointed out. Putin says Russia has to return to discussing the nuclear potential of the UK and France. The new START deal, in effect since February 5, 2011, is the last remaining legally binding agreement between the US and Russia. Under the document, Moscow and Washington have been required to reduce their nuclear arsenal to a total of 700 missiles, 800 launchers and 1,550 deployed warheads. The treaty was set to expire last year, but both sides managed to find common ground to approve a prolongation of the accord for 5 more years without renegotiating any of its terms. Turkish Foreign Minister says Ankara is still unable to approve Sweden's NATO application. Turkey is still unable to approve Sweden's accession to NATO at this stage as Stockholm has not fully implemented its agreements with Ankara, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said on Monday. "There are certain obligations that were taken by Sweden and Finland in connection with their intention to enter NATO. We do not see the implementation of all steps on the part of Sweden, so at this stage we cannot approve its entry into the alliance," Cavusoglu said at a joint press conference with Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó. The top Turkish diplomat acknowledged that the Swedish authorities had implemented a number of obligations under the Madrid memo, but noted that the Kurdistan Workers' Party was still operating in the country. "At the same time, this situation is more of a NATO problem," Cavusoglu said, adding that Ankara had no other claims to Sweden and Finland in bilateral relations. Ankara will not approve Sweden, Finland NATO membership under current conditions, Turkish FM says. Sweden and Finland applied for NATO membership in May 2022, several months after Russia launched a military operation in Ukraine. Their membership bids were initially blocked by Turkey, which accused Stockholm and Helsinki of supporting terrorists, referring to supporters of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which Ankara considers a terrorist organization. Turkey lifted its objections after the 3 leaders met in Madrid in June 2022 where they signed a security memorandum, which unblocked the process of accession of the 2 Nordic countries to the alliance. Finns ready for NATO without Sweden while PM promises hand-in-hand accession. However, the accession process came to another standstill in January 2023 following the Koran-burning incident in Sweden, with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan saying that Stockholm should not count on Ankara's support for its NATO bid. Turkey also discussed with other NATO members the possibility of approving Finland's application separately. The talks with Sweden also resumed. Hungary has joined Turkey as the only NATO member countries that have not ratified Finland and Sweden's accession protocols yet. On Friday, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán said that the Hungarian parliament was not enthusiastic about ratifying the bids since the Finnish and Swedish authorities were spreading shameless lies about Budapest. In addition, Orbán said that if Finland and Sweden were admitted into NATO, the immediate border between the alliance and Russia would increase by 1,000 kilometers, 621 miles. UK and EU reach deal on Northern Ireland trade rules. The Northern Ireland Protocol, added to the UK's withdrawal agreement with the EU, has inflamed sectarian tensions over the imposition of a customs border between the exclave and the British mainland rather than with the Southern Republic as Brussels threatened before Brexit. The UK and European Union, EU, have reached an agreement on changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. An agreement has been reached. The deal is done, an anonymous British government source told the media on Monday afternoon. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen, President of the EU's executive, the European Commission, met for talks in Windsor, just west of London, at lunchtime. The two were set to hold a press conference later in the afternoon. Von der Leyen was also reportedly granted an audience with King Charles III at Windsor Castle. Minutes before the news broke, Northern Irish Democratic Unionist Party, DUP, leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said he was ambivalent about the prospect of a deal. "I'm neither positive nor negative," Donaldson said. "We need to take time to look at the deal, what's available, and how that matches our 7 tests." UK and EU begin final round of talks on Windsor deal to fix NI protocol. The protocol, an anexa to the UK's 2020 post-Brexit withdrawal agreement with Brussels, keeps the UK's exclave of Northern Ireland within the EU's single market. The Republic of Ireland, a member of the bloc, insisted that backstop arrangement was necessary to avoid a hard border with customs checks that might breach the terms of the 1999 Good Friday Agreement, which ended 3 decades of sectarian terrorism in the north. But that has meant customs checks on goods coming from mainland Britain and even bans on certain products like sausages and potted nursery plants. That has angered the majority unionist community, leading to unrest and a hoax bomb threat to Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney. Apple paid $12 million antitrust fine in Kaspersky lab case. Tech giant Apple has paid an antitrust fine in the case with Kaspersky Lab for abuse of a dominant position in the mobile application market in the amount of 906 million rubles, $12 million, a source familiar with the case told reporters. Apple has paid an antitrust fine of 906 million rubles, the source said. This is the case of Kaspersky Lab. He clarified that the company could face doubling the fine if it was not paid on time. UK launches antitrust investigation into Apple, Google mobile browsers. Earlier, on February 14th, the arbitration court of the Moscow district, following 2 lower instances, confirmed the legality of both the decision of the Russian Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, FOS, that Apple had abused its dominant position in the mobile applications market, and the fine of $12 million imposed on it for this. The FOS, following a complaint by Kaspersky Lab, concluded that Apple had abused its dominant position in the iOS app market on 2 counts: obstructing parental control of app developers and non-transparent rules for allowing third-party apps in the App Store. In particular, Kaspersky Lab complained to the FOS about the unreasonable, in its opinion, rejection of versions of the parental control program Kaspersky Safe Kids, KSK. Germany's public debt increases tenfold since 2021. Germany's public debt has increased tenfold since the beginning of 2021, from €4 billion to €40 billion, $4.20 billion $42.2 billion, Finance Minister Christian Lindner said on Monday. The country's debt burden has increased from 4 to almost €40 billion since 2021. This is the money that will be missing for other purposes, primarily for education, digitalization, and investment in climate protection. Therefore, it is economically feasible to contain the growth of debts, Lindner said on Twitter. European countries racked up nearly €800 BLN energy crisis spending bill, Brussels think tank says. Last week, Lindner attributed the debt growth to emergency measures during the COVID-19 pandemic and the energy crisis. The minister emphasized that the government needs to limit its spending in order to solve the current economic problems, such as decline in living standards. Europe has been facing a massive energy crisis and struggling to keep its industries running in the aftermath of the global economic recession and Russia's military operation in Ukraine. Launch of SpaceX Crew 6 spacecraft to International Space Station cancelled. The launch of SpaceX's Crew 6 manned mission to the International Space Station, ISS, rescheduled for Monday morning has been cancelled, NASA said. Launch update. Today's Crew 6 launch has been scrubbed due to an issue with ground systems. Stand by for details on a new launch date and time, NASA tweeted. SpaceX, in turn, said that propellant offload has begun ahead of the crew disembarking Dragon, adding that the crew and the vehicles are healthy. Later in the day, NASA said that a new attempt to launch the Falcon 9 rocket could be scheduled for March 2nd. The next available launch attempt is at 12:34 a.m. EST 5:34 GMT Thursday, March 2nd, pending resolution of the technical issue preventing Monday's launch. NASA said in a statement. The launch of SpaceX's Crew 6 manned mission was initially scheduled to take place on February 26 from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, but was later postponed to February 27 due to weather conditions. SpaceX says grateful to NASA, Russia for opportunity to fly astronauts to ISS. A cosmonaut of Russian State Space Corporation Roscosmos, Andrei Fedyaev, will join UAE astronaut Sultan Al-Niyati and NASA astronauts Stephen Bowen and Warren Hoberg on the Crew 6 mission. Fedyaev will be the second Russian cosmonaut to board the U.S. Crew Dragon spacecraft as part of the ISS Integrated Flights Agreement. Scientists unravel some Japanese Mermaid-Mummy secrets, still have questions, media reports. A small mermaid mummy resembling a hybrid of a monkey and a fish was kept in an ancient Japanese temple for many years. However, modern research has been able to reveal some information about the object, while raising new questions. The unusual artifact was the property of the Enjoin Temple in southern Japan. The 30-centimeter-long mermaid has long been the property of the temple, but neither monks nor parishioners knew what it was or how it got there. The creature still has hair on its head, 5 fingers on each hand, palms pressed against its face, mouth open, and scales covering its back. We have worshipped it, hoping that it would help alleviate the coronavirus pandemic even if only slightly, Kozen Kuita, the head priest at the temple, told a Japanese newspaper. The results of a study by scientists from the Kurashiki University of Science and the Arts, which lasted nearly a year, have been published only recently. The experts have concluded that the mummy was never a living creature. A computer tomography scan revealed that the mummy was made of paper, cotton, and cloth. X-rays showed that the main skeletal bones, the spine, skull and ribs, were missing inside. The skull, while appearing to resemble a monkey skull, was made mostly out of cotton. Only fish bones were found in the lower part of the body, most likely from the tail or fin of a large fish. The mummy's jaw and teeth belonged to a marine predator, and the skin of a fugu or puffer fish was used for the arms, shoulders, and neck. Carbon dating shows that the effigy was likely made in the late 1800s. A note stored with the mummy said it was caught in a fishing net in the 1700s. While it is impossible to say for sure who made the strange doll or why, scientists speculate that it may be related to legends of mermaids, which date back to the 8th century AD. It's the same as when people join their hands in front of Buddhist statues made of stone or wood. I would like to continue to protect and pass on this mummy with great care, Kozen Kuita said, referring to the future of the mummy. The mermaid from Okayama is not the only one of its kind. About a dozen similar mummies have been found throughout Japan, though they have not been investigated in as much detail. Solar heartbeat? Astronomers pinpoint pulse-like signals in Sun's atmosphere. The study attributes this mysterious heartbeat to the mysterious quasi-periodic pulsations of the Sun, QPP. A team of researchers has detected a radio signal in the Sun's atmosphere that resembles a heartbeat, and the breakthrough study was published in the peer-reviewed scientific journal, Nature Communications. The solar flare that occurred in July 2017 was chosen as the focus of the study. Scientists analyzed the results of microwave observations that were carried out using the expanded Owens Valley Solar Array, EOFSA, radio telescope in California. Very curious, scientists baffled by images showing fragment breaking off from sun. EOFSA is used for routine observations of the sun over a wide range of microwave frequencies from 1 to 18 GHz, and is sensitive to radio emissions emanated by high-energy electrons in the sun's atmosphere that are triggered by solar flares. The team noticed radio bursts with a signal pattern repeating every 10 to 20 seconds. The pattern was like a heartbeat, claims Yuan Genkao, the lead study author. Solar radio bursts are intense bursts of radio waves often associated with solar flares and characterized by repetitive signals. However, the origin of these repeating patterns, also called quasi-periodic pulsations, has long been a mystery. The team identified a strong quasi-periodic ripple signal at the base of a layer of electric current that stretches more than 25,000 kilometers through the flare region, where opposing magnetic field lines converge, break, and reconnect. This phenomenon is known as magnetic reconnection, which releases the energy that powers the flare. The researchers also found a secondary source of heartbeat that is located along the stretched current sheet, which pulsates in the same way as the main source of QPP, and is closely associated with it. The computer simulation showed that magnetic islands or bubble-like structures are formed in the current sheet, whose movement to the flare region occurs with a quasi-periodic character. The appearance of magnetic islands within the long-stretched current sheet plays a key role in tweaking the energy release rate during this eruption. Such a quasi-periodic energy release process leads to a repeating production of high-energy electrons, manifesting as QPPs in the microwave and soft X-ray wavelengths, claims Shi Cheng, a professor of astronomy at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. According to the authors, the study made it possible to accurately determine the origin of QPP in solar flares and encouraged a revision of the interpretation of similar events recorded earlier. Russia strikes intelligence center near Kiev. A special operations center in western Ukraine was also hit, according to Moscow. A Ukrainian electronic intelligence center located in the settlement of Brovary in the Kiev region has reportedly been struck by Russian missiles, according to a Monday update on the Russian Defense Ministry's official Telegram channel. The ministry also reported that Russian missiles had struck the West Special Operations Center, located near the city of Khmelnytsky in western Ukraine. The update states that Russia's armed forces have continued their offensive in the Donetsk direction, where they have neutralized over 250 Ukrainian servicemen, as well as a dozen pieces of military equipment, including 2 tanks. The Russian military also claims to have destroyed an ammunition depot near the city of Artyomovsk/Bakhmut as well as a US-Maiden/TPQ-37 counter-battery radar. In the Kupiansk direction, the ministry claims that Russian forces have eliminated up to 70 Ukrainian soldiers, and killed or injured about 140 troops in the Krasno-Limansky direction. In the South Donetsk and Zaporozhye directions, they claim to have eliminated up to 95 enemy combatants, and up to 60 in the Kherson direction. In a similar update on Sunday, the ministry also announced the destruction of 6 sabotage and reconnaissance groups in the Kharkov region, as well as the shooting down of a Ukrainian Mi-8 helicopter near the village of Golyabovka. Since the launch of Russia's military offensive in Ukraine 1 year ago, the Russian Defense Ministry estimates that the Ukrainian armed forces have lost a total of 390 airplanes, 211 helicopters, 3,248 UAVs, 406 anti-aircraft missile systems, 8,058 tanks, and other armored combat vehicles, 228 field artillery guns and mortars, as well as 8,574 special military vehicles. Ex-Russian president warns of nuclear apocalypse. Continued Western support for Ukraine will lead to a collapse and defeat for everyone, Dmitry Medvedev says. The West is endangering the very existence of human civilization by threatening Moscow, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has claimed. Continued support for Ukraine from the US and its allies could result in a nuclear apocalypse, he warned. A great achievement of the Soviet and Russian leadership in the early 1990s was that it was able to preserve the country's nuclear potential after the collapse of the USSR, Medvedev argued in an article published in Izvestia newspaper on Monday. The West is delusional if it thinks that, after putting the Soviet Union to rest, it'll be able to also bury modern Russia without significant problems for itself, by throwing the lives of thousands of people involved in the conflict in Ukraine into the furnace, he wrote. Those are extremely dangerous misconceptions, added Medvedev, who is now the deputy chair of the Russian Security Council. If the issue of the very existence of Russia is raised seriously, it won't be decided on the Ukrainian front. It'll be decided together with the issue of the further existence of the entire human civilization, he warned. The US and its allies, who continue to pump Ukraine with weapons and prevent all attempts to restore peace talks between Moscow and Kiev, refuse to understand that their goals are bound to lead to a total fiasco, the defeat for everyone, a collapse. An apocalypse when the former life would have to be forgotten for centuries, until the smoky debris ceases to emit radiation, the former president said. Russia will not allow this to happen, Medvedev wrote. He noted that the West and its satellites represent only 15% of the world's population, while the rest of the world is greater in numbers and a lot stronger. The calm power of our great country and the credibility of its partners are the key to preserving the future for the entire world, he concluded. During the conflict in Ukraine, Russia warned that it was ready to use its nuclear arsenal in the event it faced an existential threat from nuclear or conventional weapons. However, Moscow denied Western claims that it was planning to deploy nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory. Russia explains halt in oil exports to Poland. Warsaw didn't pay for the crude supply to its refineries, according to Transneft. Russian oil flows to Poland have been halted due to the stoppage of payment for deliveries, Russia's state-owned pipeline transport company Transneft announced on Monday. Transneft, which operates Russia's section of the Druzhba pipeline, explained that it transfers oil to other countries in line with the export schedule approved by the Russian Ministry of Energy, as well as routing orders processed by freight forwarders. Transneft is not currently transporting oil to Poland, the company's spokesman Igor Deman said. He noted that pumping to Polish refineries was scheduled for the third 10-day interval of February. However, routing orders with confirmed resource and transit payments were not processed, he explained, adding that operational changes were made to the schedule, excluding supplies for Polish consumers. On Saturday, Poland's largest oil company PKN Orlen said it had stopped receiving oil via the Druzhba pipeline from Russia. While the EU banned seaborne oil imports from the country last December, pipeline deliveries were exempted from the sanctions package in order to secure supplies to landlocked members of the bloc. Poland has been getting piped oil under a contract with Russian oil and gas company Tatneft after a previous supply agreement with oil major Rosneft expired. According to Orlen's CEO Daniel Obajtek, Russian oil currently accounts for 10% of Poland's imports, after Warsaw slashed shipments from the sanctioned country. The current contract with Tatneft provides 200,000 tons of oil per month to Polish refineries and expires in December 2024. The northern part of the Druzhba pipeline system feeds 2 refineries in eastern Germany as well as plants operated by Orlen in Poland. Warsaw has repeatedly pledged to replace Russian oil with crude from the U.S., the Middle East and other sources. Oil shipments via the pipeline's southern branch to Slovakia and the Czech Republic, where Orlen operates 2 refineries, remained unchanged. Landmark U.S. military victory slammed as evil. Critics have called for Abrar Omish to be removed from her post as a school board member in Virginia. A school board member in the U.S. state of Virginia has ignited a media maelstrom for suggesting that the Battle of Iwo Jima, a key victory for the United States Army during World War II, unfortunately happened and that it set a record for human evil. Something for us to certainly reflect on as we learn our history and think about it, said Abrar Omish, who is Muslim, at a meeting of the Fairfax County School Board in Virginia last week in reference to the United States Japanese Day of Remembrance, which notes the internment of Japanese Americans in 1942 following the attack on Pearl Harbor. The days when, Iwo Jima unfortunately happened and set a record for really, what I hate to say, human evil is capable of, she said. Omish's account of the key military win sparked criticism, not least of which from the Fairfax County Parents Association, who questioned why she was condemning the brave U.S. Marines that invaded Iwo Jima. Perhaps she meant to say something else, they added. Other Twitter critics demanded that Omish step down from her position. Omish reacted to the reports by claiming in an email to the New York Post that her comments were directed at the US policy at the time of the internment of Japanese Americans, and not the military battle. The Battle of Iwo Jima is considered to be among the most violent battles of World War II. fighting for control of airfields more than 600 miles south of Tokyo between U.S. Marines and the Imperial Army of Japan lasted for 5 weeks in 1945. It resulted in the deaths of nearly 7,000 members of the U.S. military, as well as the vast majority of the 18,000 Japanese soldiers stationed there. Omish was criticized last year when she voted against a resolution to honor victims of the September 11th terrorist attacks in the United States. She claimed that doing so would ostracize Arab Americans, American Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus and all brown or other individuals that have been mistaken for Muslims since that day over the past 2 decades. Omish's father, Dr. Issam Omish, is a founding member of an Islamic center in Virginia that was previously under the authority of Anwar al-Awlaki, an American imam who was reportedly radicalized and subsequently killed in a U.S. drone strike in Yemen in 2011. Chinese military participates in humanitarian assistance exercise in Thailand. The Chinese military has dispatched a contingent to participate in the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief exercise of the Cobra Gold 2023 multinational exercise in Thailand, said a Chinese defense spokesperson on Thursday. The contingent, selected from the Southern Theater Command of the People's Liberation Army, will participate in the exercise in Thailand from February 9 to March 10, according to Tan Kefei, spokesperson for China's Ministry of National Defense. He added that the Chinese Army has been invited to participate in 10 consecutive editions of the exercise since 2014. The exercise this year includes engineering assistance, the tabletop exercise of humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and live drills under the scenarios of buildings collapsing, hazardous substances leakage, first aid, and fire rescue, among others, said Tan. Defense Ministry voices concern over U.S. moves in Southeast Asia. A spokesman for the Defense Ministry expressed great concern about the U.S. latest moves in Southeast Asia, saying China is paying close attention to the situation. During the recent visit to the Philippines by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the U.S. announced it gained access to 4 military bases in the Southeast Asian country and the 2 countries would resume joint patrols in the South China Sea. Senior Colonel Tan Kefei, spokesman for the Ministry of National Defense, refuted those actions, calling the U.S. the most dangerous factor and the biggest source of chaos aggravating regional tensions and threatening regional peace and stability. At present, the U.S. is constantly seeking to strengthen its military deployment in the region and scheming for confrontations between camps, which will only create more trust deficit and tensions, he said. Tan added defense and security cooperation among countries should be conducive to regional peace and stability and should not target or harm the interests of a third party. He reminded countries in the region to see the true purpose of the U.S. in maintaining its hegemony, to avoid being dragged into the wrong path of bloc confrontations and zero-sum games. Defense Ministry affirms commitment to no first use. By Zhang Chenglong, ChinaDaily.com.cn updated, February 23, 2023, 21:55. China has always pursued a no-first-use policy for nuclear weapons and will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states or nuclear weapon-free zones, China's defense ministry said on Thursday, stressing the nation will never engage in a nuclear arms race with any country. Senior Colonel Tan Kefei, spokesman for the Ministry of National Defense, made the remarks in response to some media reports which he described hyped up China's nuclear strategy and China's nuclear threat. According to a recent Wall Street Journal report, the United States Strategic Command has notified the U.S. Congress China now has more land-based intercontinental range missile launchers than the U.S. Some Japanese media outlets also claimed China plans to significantly expand its nuclear arsenal by 2027 and might abandon its no-first-use policy once China achieves its goal of military modernization. Those reports are irresponsible sensationalism, Tan said. China pursues a nuclear strategy of self-defense, the goal of which is to maintain national strategic security by deterring other countries from using or threatening to use nuclear weapons against China. China's nuclear policy is highly stable, continuous, and predictable, the spokesman stressed, underlining the country wouldn't involve itself in any nuclear arms race and always keeps its nuclear capabilities at the minimum level required for national security. The defense official also criticized the U.S., which he said has the world's largest nuclear arsenal but is still investing heavily in upgrading its triad of nuclear forces, developing low-yield nuclear weapons, lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons and strengthening its nuclear umbrella. The U.S. has repeatedly hyped up the so-called China nuclear threat to find an excuse to expand its nuclear arsenal and maintain its military hegemony, Tan said. He urged parties concerned to stop groundless hyping, reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their national security policies and adopt a no-first-use policy, as well as fulfill their responsibilities for nuclear disarmament and take concrete action to maintain global strategic stability. Despite bogus reports, nation will not engage in arms race. China has always pursued the policy of no first use of nuclear weapons and will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states or nuclear weapon-free zones, said Ministry of National Defense on Thursday, stressing that the nation will never engage in a nuclear arms race with any country. Senior Colonel Tan Kefei, spokesman for the Ministry of National Defense, made the remarks at a news conference in response to some media reports that he said hyped up China's nuclear strategy and its so-called nuclear threat. According to a recent Wall Street Journal report, the United States Strategic Command has notified the U.S. Congress that China now has more land-based intercontinental missile launchers than the U.S. In addition, some Japanese media claimed that China plans to significantly expand its nuclear arsenal by 2027 and might abandon its no-first-use policy of nuclear weapons once China achieves its goal of military modernization. Those reports are irresponsible sensationalism, said Tan. China pursues a nuclear strategy of self-defense, the goal of which is to maintain national strategic security by deterring other countries from using or threatening to use nuclear weapons against China. China's nuclear policy is highly stable, continuous, and predictable, the spokesman stressed, underlining that the country wouldn't get involved in any nuclear arms race with any other country and always keeps its nuclear capabilities at the minimum level required for national security. The defense official also criticized the U.S., which he said is still investing heavily in upgrading its triad of nuclear forces, developing low-yield nuclear weapons, lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons and strengthening its nuclear umbrella. The U.S. has repeatedly hyped up the so-called China nuclear threat, just in order to find an excuse to expand its nuclear arsenal and maintain its military hegemony, said Tan. He urged relevant parties to stop groundless hype, reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their national security policies and adopt a no-first-use nuclear weapons policy, as well as fulfill their special and prior responsibilities for nuclear disarmament and take concrete actions to maintain global strategic stability. Separately, the spokesman expressed great concerns about the latest moves of the U.S. in Southeast Asia, saying China is paying close attention to the situation. During the recent Philippines visit of U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the U.S. side announced it had secured access to 4 military bases in the Southeast Asian country and that the two countries would resume joint patrols in the South China Sea. Tan rebuked those actions, calling the U.S. the most dangerous factor and the biggest source of chaos, aggravating regional tensions and threatening regional peace and stability. At present, the U.S. is constantly seeking to strengthen its military deployment in the region and scheming for confrontations between camps, which will only create more of a trust deficit and tensions, he said. Tan underlined that defense and security cooperation among countries should be conducive to regional peace and stability and should not target or harm the interests of a third party, reminding countries in the region to see clearly the true purpose of the U.S. in maintaining its hegemony, in case of being dragged into the wrong path of bloc confrontation in a zero-sum game. White paper lays out emission reduction plans for corporate operations. As the climate crisis has become one of the most pressing issues to the global community, more companies should have emission reduction initiatives in all internal operations throughout the entire value chain, a new white paper said. The white paper, released by the United Nations Global Compact and Boston Consulting Group, said among responsive actions taken by all countries on the planet to address climate change, those measures duly put into practice have all proven to improve the resilience of companies to cope with this crisis. For a company, setting science-based carbon goals brings forth 5 benefits. For starters, it helps a company enhance the reputation of its brand, cement investors' confidence, enables it to adapt to policies dexterously, facilitates its pursuit of innovation and increases its profit margins, said Wu Xinyi, managing director and senior partner of Boston Consulting Group. Wu added, this report not only analyzes the macro environment around the world and the criteria for corporate climate goals theoretically, but also introduces recent progress made by role model companies in pillar industries by adopting major net zero measures in all procedures of internal operation throughout the entire value chain. Best practices in emission reduction of leading companies in all industries all over the world are analyzed in order to draw out conducive insights, help companies reduce emissions throughout the entire value chain by way of cross-industry collaboration worldwide, enable them to achieve the carbon neutrality target at a quicker pace, in a measurable way and in compliance with the working principles of climate science, and empower global eco-partners to embrace a net zero future. The report proposes 3 main emission reduction initiatives to be put into practice inside and outside of corporate operations: adoption of renewable resources, enhancement of energy utilization efficiency, and recycling of waste energy. ADL report, mass shootings in U.S. linked to hateful ideology. Many mass shootings that were done by extremists last year in the United States had ties to right-wing extremism and were often fueled by white supremacist ideology, according to the Anti-Defamation League, ADL. The ADL is an international Jewish non-governmental organization based in the United States specializing in civil rights law. Its Center on Extremism, which tracks slayings linked to various forms of extremism in the United States and compiles them in an annual report, found that right-wing extremists killed 25 people in 12 separate incidents in 2022. It is not an exaggeration to say that we live in an age of extremist mass killings, the report said. One of the most high-profile cases was the shooting at a Tops supermarket in Buffalo, New York, by Peyton Gendron, a white gunman who killed 10 black shoppers. In another incident, a gunman killed 5 people and wounded 17 at Club Q, a LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs, Colorado. The gunman, Anderson Lee Aldrich, 22, allegedly ran a neo-Nazi website and used racial and gay slurs while gaming, said police during a trial to determine if the shooter should face hate charges. The ADL's report revealed that the number of cases that have been linked to extremism in the past 10 years was 3 times higher than it was in any other span over a decade since the 1970s. Only 2 to 7 cases related to extremism had occurred every decade since the 1970s until 2000. But by 2010, the figure rose to 21 and the number of cases has continued to climb, according to the report. Between 2010 and 2020, 164 people died after being involved in a mass shooting by extremists. The number is higher than in any other decade except the 1990s. At least 93% of all murders were carried out with a firearm, the data showed. Aside from right-wing extremism, left-wing extremism is also of concern. The ADL found that left-wing extremists engage in violence ranging from assaults to fire bombings and arsons, but since the late 1980s have not often targeted people with deadly violence. Some other mass murders have been fueled by Islamic extremists who support the Islamic State group, or Muslim extremism. However, those incidents have decreased significantly in the U.S. over the past 5 years, and if that trend continues, the main domestic threat in the U.S. will be from white supremacists in the future, the report said. Of particular concern in recent years are shootings inspired by white supremacist accelerationist propaganda urging such attacks, it said. The Center on Extremism has followed trends in extremism since 2008 and has looked back at cases from the 1970s onwards. It said it had identified 62 extremist-connected mass killing incidents since 1970, with 46 of them being ideologically motivated. Over half or 57% of these killings occurred within the past 12 years over extreme ideology. In 2022, 18 of the 25 extremist-related murders were done in whole or part for ideological motives. The 7 other murders either had no clear motive or were committed for a non-ideological motive, the report states. White supremacists commit the greatest number of domestic extremist-related murders in most years, but in 2022 the percentage was unusually high. 21 of the 25 murders were linked to white supremacists, the ADL's report said. Again, this is primarily due to mass shootings. Only 1 of the murders was committed by a right-wing anti-government extremist, the lowest number since 2017. Many of the gunmen who were inspired by hateful ideology left public manifestos online about why they had to kill their victims. Patrick Crusius, a 21-year-old gunman, carried out a shooting rampage in El Paso, Texas, in August 2019, killing 23 people who were mainly Hispanic at a Walmart. Minutes before his killing spree, he posted an anti-immigrant manifesto online explaining his actions. Similarly, Gendron, the 18-year-old gunman in the Buffalo shooting, posted a racist manifesto online before live-streaming his killings on social media. He killed 10 people and wounded 3 more, and altogether, 11 of his victims were black. In the days after the attack, President Joe Biden condemned his actions while visiting victims' families and local officials. Hate and fear are being given too much oxygen by those who pretend to love America but who don't understand America, Biden said. We are the most multiracial, most dynamic nation in the history of the world. Now's the time for the people of all races, from every background, to speak up as a majority of Americans and reject white supremacy, he added. China calls for vigilance as NATO extends reach. Security arrangements in the Asia-Pacific are being realigned as NATO looks to the region for an Asian version of the Transatlantic Alliance. The latest move is a pact signed by Philippine President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. and Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida that allows their countries' armed forces to work together on disaster relief. This arrangement is being seen as a step toward a broader pact that could allow the 2 countries to deploy forces on each other's soil, Reuters reported. In a joint statement issued on February 9, Marcos and Kishida vowed to strengthen the 2 countries' defense and security collaboration through strategic reciprocal port calls and aircraft visits, transfer of more defense equipment and technology, continuous cooperation on previously transferred defense equipment and capacity building. Marcos, at the end of a 5-day visit to Japan on Sunday, said he saw no reason why the Philippines should not have a visiting forces agreement with Japan if it boosted maritime security. This would allow Japan to develop security collaboration with countries in the region and beyond, and NATO to pay closer attention to Asia or the so-called Indo-Pacific. Japan says it plans to use its official development aid to help poorer countries with their maritime safety and other security capabilities. Its Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi said it was indispensable for Japan to not only fundamentally reinforce its own defense power, but also to improve the deterrence capability of like-minded countries. In April, Japan's foreign ministry will get 2 billion yen, $15 million, to help strengthen the national security of such countries. The money is primarily for Indo-Pacific militaries and separate from the 442 billion yen in development money that the ministry says is not to fund weapons, the Associated Press reported. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, while visiting South Korea last month, referred to like-minded democracies, a term covering some countries outside the Transatlantic Alliance. In a speech at the Che Institute for Advanced Studies in Seoul on January 30th, Stoltenberg said that what happens in Europe matters to the Indo-Pacific region, and what happens in Asia matters to NATO. In February 2022, the White House released its Indo-Pacific report stating that the European Union and NATO are increasingly turning their attention to the region and will harness this opportunity to align approaches and implement coordinated initiatives, thereby multiplying their effectiveness. As NATO's partners in the Asia-Pacific region, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea attended the alliance's Madrid summit in July, a historic first. In Seoul, Stoltenberg also publicly announced his intention to invite both South Korean and Japanese leaders to the NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, later this year. By declaring his intention to once again host this grouping of NATO Asia-Pacific partners at the annual gathering of Allied leaders, Stoltenberg is signaling that this was not a one-off and could soon become part of NATO's new normal. Sarah Muller, faculty member of the Security Studies program at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, wrote in a blog for the Atlantic Council. On January 25th, NATO launched an initiative named Futures in the Indo-Pacific, which will consist of a series of discussions among experts from Belgium, Australia, France, and Japan, over the next 2 years. Their exchanges will examine relevant developments in the Indo-Pacific and the potential implications for security in the Euro-Atlantic area, and also further NATO's cooperation with its partners in the Indo-Pacific. Carmen Romero, NATO's Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy, stressed in her introductory remarks at the event at NATO headquarters in Brussels the importance of building strong partnerships with countries in the Indo-Pacific, in line with the alliance's new strategic concept. 3 more events are scheduled for this year, in Canberra, Tokyo, and Paris, with a final conference planned in Brussels in 2024. Security initiatives such as the Australia-UK-US Agreement and the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue comprising Australia, Japan, India, and the United States, have sparked concerns in the Asia-Pacific. Regional concerns. China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said on February 1st, while claiming to remain a regional defensive alliance, NATO has constantly sought to reach beyond its traditional defense zone and scope, strengthen military and security ties with Asia-Pacific countries and hype China threats. Such developments call for high vigilance among regional countries. The Asia-Pacific is not a battlefield for geopolitical contests and does not welcome the Cold War mentality and bloc confrontation. AUKUS, which is being called a trilateral security partnership, is essentially about fueling military confrontation through military collaboration, Mao said. China is deeply concerned and firmly opposes the initiative, which creates additional nuclear proliferation risks, exacerbates the arms race in the Asia-Pacific and hurts regional peace and stability, she said. Wang Sheng, a professor of international politics at Jilin University, said that Stoltenberg's visit to South Korea and Japan is a move to push forward an Asian version of NATO. Last year, Japan and South Korea joined the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, which is open to countries that are not part of the military alliance. The center now consists of 32 members, 27 of whom are full NATO members, and 5 contributors that are not part of the defensive alliance. Lu Weidong, a researcher with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences Institute of American Studies, said that Stoltenberg's visit is the beginning of substantial progress on NATO's Asia-Pacific version. In addition to the US, South Korea and Japan, NATO allies of the US, such as France, Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom, are showing growing concern about security issues in the Asia-Pacific region. The security environment in the region is already complicated, Lu said, adding that the intervention of powers from outside the Asia-Pacific will complicate matters. China releases new plan to promote digital development. A new plan, aimed to push forward China's digital development, was released by the CPC, the Communist Party of China, Central Committee and the State Council on Monday. The nation's digital development is expected to be among the top countries by 2035 with substantial progress in fields such as digital infrastructure, digital economy, technology innovation, technology application, cybersecurity, digital governance, and international cooperation. The plan said China will cement the buildup of digital infrastructure and the data resources system, as well as further integrate digital technologies with sectors of the economy, politics, culture, society, and ecological civilization. It stressed enhancing the ability of technological innovation and cybersecurity and improving the environment both nationwide and globally for digital development. The plan mentions speeding up the construction of the 5G network and gigabit optical networks, the large-scale application of Internet Protocol version 6, IPv6, and Beidou navigation satellite system as well as Internet of Things, IoT, development. China will set up a national management mechanism for public data and national databases in key sectors such as technology, education, and public health. The country will further apply the digital technologies to the real economy in fields of agriculture, industries, finance, education, medical care, transportation, and energy. How does China aim to grow and fairly share the cake of social wealth? Editor's note, the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China concluded with a blueprint mapped out for China's future development in the next 5 years and beyond. CGTN is publishing How China Works, Charting the Future, a special series delving deep into a key report adopted at the Congress to see how the country can fulfill the goals and tasks on the new journey of the new era. In the new development stage, our country is experiencing a profound level of change in its domestic and external environment and faces many new matters of consequence. We should understand them fully. We must understand our strategic goal of common prosperity and know how to make it happen. Under socialism, our expectation is that the country will progressively unleash and develop the productive forces, create and accumulate social wealth, and at the same time prevent polarization and make more substantive progress in promoting well-rounded human development and common prosperity for all. We should make the cake of social wealth bigger through the concerted efforts of all our people. Then we should properly handle the relationship between growth and distribution by institutional means so as to share the cake fairly. This will take a long time, and we should create the conditions, improve the relevant institutions, and take steady steps towards this goal. In promoting high-quality development, we should prioritize employment, which is pivotal to people's well-being. We should make greater use of the functions and roles of distribution. We should properly handle the relationship between efficiency and equity and put in place a basic institutional framework in which distribution, redistribution, and third distribution coordinate with and complement each other. Distribution according to work should continue as the mainstay, and we should increase the share of work remuneration in primary distribution and improve distribution based on factors of production. We should ensure the adjusting role of redistribution and make it more targeted by better leveraging taxation, social security, and transfer payments. We should bring into play the role of third distribution, and guide and support enterprises and social groups with both the will and the capacity to participate actively in public welfare and charity undertakings. But we will not allow charitable donations to be coerced by means of moral blackmail. We should respect the principle of doing what we can to the best of our ability, focus on improving public services, provide basic public services in a targeted manner in education, healthcare, elderly care, housing, and other fields that concern the people the most, and ensure subsistence for those in difficulty. We should not set expectations too high or make unrealistic commitments.